to? Hi, Blair. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit more, your story, and what brought you to your zone of genius. So, let's start first with where in the world are you tuning in from?
I live in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is north of Boston and very close to New Hampshire.
Okay. Okay, amazing. So nice and warm there today. You've let me know. Yeah.
Yes.
Humid and beautiful. Sure. Okay. Well, excellent. I'm tuning in from Saskatchewan, Canada. So a little bit of a distance between you and I. So, let's start first, Blair. What brought you to the podcast today? Who are you, and what brought you? What is your story?
Well, my story is about a little known condition that's very underreported because the condition itself would bar people who are blocked from intimacy, from seeking help, from seeking visibility, from being transparent, from doing what's probably in their very best interest. This is a maladaptation, the schizoid personality disorder. It is not an organic mental illness. It is something that I and the others learned in childhood as a defense from abuse or overwhelming criticism. But it is dangerous to live with because a person with this condition is less likely to go to a doctor, a preventative screening, seek outside intervention, expertise. A person who's never had enough nurture or felt loved in their lives can be very susceptible to manipulators, which abound. A person who goes around impaired, and I want to make it very clear that not every schizoid is impaired. But if a person's punch drunk, the person's going to be more susceptible to a pickpocketing, a mugging, being hit by traffic, whatever it is. This is a difficult condition to live with. And I don't mean just in terms of stunting someone professionally or romantically. I mean on a day-to-day challenge of living, being punch drunk, and trying to navigate the world.
Okay. That would have been a really overwhelming thing to have, I mean, number one, gone through. You said a maladaptation that happens from extreme criticism or abuse. So there's a story there as well. And then to have to go through the realization, diagnosis, and to get you where you are today. It sounds like you've had a very winding road.
Well, I have, but it's a purposeful road because it led me
Mm.
to write this. And I felt the trick in life, as Teilhard de Chardin has said, is to take anything that's bad and turn it into something good. And let
Mm.
people who are struggling with this know that there's nothing inherently wrong with them. What happened in childhood was unfortunate, imbalanced, and created a less than optimum outcome for them. But history does not have to repeat itself. There is
Mm.
help, there are coping mechanisms. Nowadays, there's remote work so that if they're better off out of an office, that's a
Right.
possibility. Well, somebody who's in fantasy more than other people isn't going to last very long in the employment world, or somebody who's chronically late, or
Mhm.
somebody who doesn't read social cues, which are important. They can outweigh job skills, which can be taught. Social cues can't, and they're significant in the corporate world. Somebody who's deemed as inappropriate. These
Mhm.
are all
Mhm.
factors that are going to undermine their ability to sustain themselves. And I'm not even talking about an executive level. It could be even in a menial job where somebody needs to focus, be punctual. These are things
Mhm.
that are expected in the workplace. So they don't have that ability, coupled with, I doubt they have too much self-confidence. But again, I want to be clear, not every schizoid is anxious and impaired. There are those who can function, who will just keep to themselves. And for them, if they can manage, God bless them. But I'm talking about the really vulnerable segment of the population who could wind up homeless, who are eligible for disability, who may never leave their parents' home because they can't sustain themselves. And parents could be spawning children that 40 years from now are still living at home. They may end up paying their rent. These are ramifications to consider in how you raise your children. And I felt it was unfortunate it happened to me, but I was able to write and I had enough insight into what happened and didn't want to do it and portray my parents as villains. They weren't, they were parents. But then again, I grew up in an era where there's less transparency. So fortunately, nowadays, people open up about conditions and there's remote work. There are better ways of navigating a difficult hand.
Certainly, there's no question. What was your journey like then? Whatever part you're comfortable sharing, was it, you found your diagnosis and then you began to write, or what was your journey like?
It was, it was a nightmare. I cannot overstate that. Truthfully, I don't even like to think about it. I pretend that I survived a DC-10 crash or something like that.
Fine.
I was completely traumatized by the time I went to therapy to keep having this happen to me and being called into human resources and go through my life with people saying, you don't think, you don't listen, you're weird, litany of harassments and just trying to manage, but not being able to. They see the employer sees you can't do the work. They don't understand why you can't do the work. And of course,
Mhm.
coming from Smith College and being articulate, they have high expectations.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you went on to college, despite, people saying that you don't think and you don't listen and those sorts of things. What was that journey like for you?
Well, in college itself, it's elective. So it would be easier to get away with being less than high achieving. There was
Mm.
in the book I wrote about, I was in a psych course, and even the professor recognized that I missed a lot, but he couldn't put together what was wrong. I
Mm.
didn't hear an assignment, so I didn't do the assignment. So I got an F. And it brought me down to I got a D for the course simply because I was in fantasy and did not hear but he was seeing the symptoms. I had another professor who recognized that nobody got too close to me. She saw I had a certain melancholy. Um, but I'm sorry, I lost the video. Do you want the video restored?
No problem either way.
Um, so they were seeing the symptoms. They were astute enough to see the symptoms, but they couldn't make a diagnosis. And I couldn't really expect them to. They're not psychiatrists. This wasn't the Psychiatric Institute. It was a liberal arts prestigious college where most of the other students had a better hand. They were able to focus. They were able to make decisions and set goals. They pretty much,
Right.
and this was in the era of Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, where there were very high expectations, where women were beginning to enter the professions. The old boys
Hmm.
network of medicine and law were opening their doors, business. And those who did,
Right.
it was pretty much if you didn't know what were going to do with your life, go for an MBA or go to law school or something like that. Um, I was just having a lot of problems. I could never gain any confidence. And, you don't have confidence and that reverberates. Other people don't have confidence. If I seem very timorous about speaking to you today, and I was hesitant and I mumbled and I had my mouth over my hand where the video's still on, you'd begin to question what I was saying, the credibility. I would
Mhm.
lose, it would diminish whatever I had to say, no matter how articulate or insightful. And if you don't have confidence, that's really key. We have a president that has mostly confidence, you know?
Ew.
So,
Isn't that the truth?
in my opinion, you know,
No, that's fine. Yeah. Hmm.
that's my braggadocio has carried this man beyond the corporate ladder into places where I personally do not feel somebody of his caliber belongs. But it's just what Jim Morrison in the book I wrote about, he had absolutely everything. But the emotional state, he had a genius level IQ. He was considered the most beautiful man in Hollywood, maybe even the planet. He had talent. He did not have confidence. He had demons, and demons brought him and the whole group down, as we know.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I think that's really insightful what you just said there. I couldn't agree more. Confidence is really what carries a person. And so it sounds like as part of the diagnosis, um, confidence was something hard to come by.
well, I didn't get it from my family. My mother's death really devastated me. My father was not emotionally available. He didn't really get me. Um,
Right.
he remarried rapidly, and his second wife saw me as a rival because I resembled my mother. So that was disastrous. It just often I felt like the protagonist in White Orchid. I don't know if you ever saw the movie or read the book. Like I was shunted from one fiasco to the next, and I couldn't find myself. And I couldn't concentrate. And what Selma Landisberg said to me was that it was a lack of confidence and an inability to conform to the basic requirements of the job. And as long as I had this disorder, that was going to be the case.
Hmm.
Whatever I was doing, whether it was learning to play piano, uh, become computer literate, write a book, this is how it would play out because one's always a little punch drunk. That said, you can manage better in isolation. And there are Zoids who are insightful enough to know that they do better in isolation, but I didn't go to Smith to become a cleaning lady.
Fine. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay. All right. So someone has told you then, that you have this disorder and it is impacting you. Yet, you're going through college and you're taking all the right steps. It sounds to me like you didn't really lay down to that. You didn't really say, "Oh, okay, yeah, all right, I'll fall victim to this." It sounds to me like you're kind of like, "Well, I don't want to be a cleaning lady. Like I'm going to move forward in life regardless." Am I on the right track there?
well, I think that you're right that I was enough of a fighter and
Fine.
enough resilience, but I still couldn't form a goal, any professional goal.
Right.
And I feel that I had the chops to write the book years ago, or could have written
Okay.
the book, and it stunted my ability to be prolific. Somebody
Mm,
with this kind of condition is unlikely to write a memoir, for one thing.
okay. Yeah.
Then I think the person would have a lot of trepidation about showing it to anyone. And that path
Fair.
pretty much played out that if I went, I was doing an advertising copywriting portfolio, and it, of course, took me longer than anybody else in my courses to put it together. It was a mess. I was afraid to show it to people. I was so afraid
Okay.
of rejection that it
Mm,
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're, rejected. It's like you're afraid to go into a job situation because they're going to reject you. So you're tardy, they are going to reject you in pretty short order, if that's a chronic issue. And people, of course, would give you the logical get there on time, put out your clothing the night before. That's really not going to help somebody with a phobia, whether the job
fine.
starts at 9 in the morning or 1 o'clock. you're going to run late. Even my clinician said I tended to run a few minutes late. So
Okay.
um, I think that what happened over the course of time was that I started forcing myself to put myself out there in ways that were safe, like volunteering. And then I became less self-absorbed. And I noticed there were other people there and they had their own bad hands too. They may have been able to work, but they had other kinds of problems or issues or hassles that they had to navigate and that they weren't looking to castrate me. They were just some would be accepting and some would be rejecting. So I had a more balanced notion of what it was like to put myself in public. And I knew from my experiences in offices, I did have the ability to get people to like me, but I was just still so fearful, and they would ask me what I was thinking about. And I wasn't really sure what I was thinking about, but I wasn't able to focus on the work.
Right. Right. Well, I just think that's an extraordinary step, Blair. I really want to honor you for the steps that you took going forward. I heard you say, you kind of pushed yourself to begin to do volunteering. And I think that first and foremost in this podcast, we talk a lot about overcoming difficulties, some education as well, but a lot of it is overcoming difficulties, whether that be health related or mental or whatever it is. And so I love how you took that step. You said, I'm not comfortable, but I'm going to move forward regardless. And I think that that's something that is often overlooked is that, sometimes we have to just start.
Exactly. It's like fear itself, nothing to fear, that cliche. Or it's so hot if you jump into the swimming pool, you'll acclimate automatically, that it wouldn't be so bad. And I found that there were places that really, there was the MS Society, one of my sisters has that condition, and they actually offered me a job working there. I was so productive. I was able to take my volunteering and turn it into a column that I wrote for 7 years because I was trained as a copywriter in catalog. And I had more time than I had resources, so I would go out and explore New York City and find opportunities, or I would read the Times, the home section, a designer show house was, or a house tour or something or other that appealed to me, and I would volunteer for it. And then I began to write about this, not for people who were impaired, but just for people who were retirees or starting out, that there was a tremendous amount, a hidden market of opportunity. So I called
Mm.
that the dollar was dilettante. So I used my experience to its best advantage. It helped me, but it was helping a lot of other people too who were reading that they could get haircuts or go to restaurants for soft openings or go to events that they, as a volunteer, that they could not otherwise afford to attend. So that there was
Right.
a lot of that. And then I just began to be less self-absorbed. I honestly think the crux of any kind of condition is the less self-absorbed, the less afraid you're going to be. If you just really focus on being there and being present in the moment and not overthinking it, you can
Mm.
really assimilate. I think that's the real issue with people with a lot of these disorders, with anxiety and depression, is they become so subsumed in that negative voice track, internal harping, that if they can just sort of put that on hold or mute and go, it won't be so bad. And the more they
Yeah.
do, the more they'll acclimate and the better they'll feel about themselves, because whether they can hold a job or not, there's still organizations that will value them, where their time can be productive. I'm a very big believer in that. And I went through the volunteer referral service in New York a lot. So I just had to structure my time somehow without becoming obsessed
Yeah.
with why I couldn't function. in that way.
Mm. Okay, I want to really spend a moment here, Blair, because I think that what you've said has been really, really inspiring, and like you said, kind of the crux of the issue, like how we can move forward when we're going through what sounds to me like just about anything that feels limiting. How you said that, getting out of your own negative story that's replaying over and over and over again, and instead becoming, what did you use the word present in your
Oh
in
my
your
goodness.
day-to-day life? Could you say more about that?
About being present, it means that just, for one thing, it would improve your focus if you're able to do that because you're not there to daydream, be it volunteering or in corporate America. If you want to do something, and anything that is worthwhile involves effort and focus and certainly a belief in yourself. But okay, you don't have a belief in yourself, but that can develop in time. But if you're able to think, I'm here fulfilling a need, and these people seem to accept me, maybe even they like me, and they don't care if I'm 10 minutes late, I'll stay 10 minutes later. They want me to come back. So they appreciate whatever, even if it's just stuffing envelopes or making phone tree. And I did the latter a lot for the AIDS walk, which I absolutely loved. They were a wonderful group. They made a very convivial environment, and I enjoyed recruiting and doing that kind of sort of telemarketing and getting people to participate. And I felt really good about that. There were a lot of the opportunities that I went year in and year out, actually, in retrospect. I was helping them, but I don't think they had any idea how much they were helping me.
Mm, that's
So,
beautiful.
yeah. So,
Hmm. Okay. Okay, well, yeah, that just feels really like the meat. So thank you so much for sharing that, kind of the meat and potatoes of perhaps some of the learnings that you've had over the years, that have really skyrocketed you. Would I be correct in saying that?
well, I mean, I don't know in terms of, I hope my book succeeds. I was able to do a lot with a difficult hand, but I'm very determined. And I always kept the soundtrack in my mind was history doesn't have to repeat itself. You don't have to let what happened, you don't have to let those people haunt you. And the voice is like just suited for manual labor, stuff that my mother said. I really try to think about more positive ways of looking at the world. And I know that sounds really reductionist and simple, but I think that was the best coping mechanism for me, was just to go into a situation, leave the demons alone, let them, cut them loose, and just go and do what you have to do there and take it as a fresh experience each time and as purposefully and as focused I could, realizing, of course, there's going to be rejection, but there's also going to be acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, you don't have to necessarily have the confidence or the belief in self right away. That can come with the action that you take.
Right. Well, I mean, little by little, it came in increments because I followed my heart. And I also did a Streets Apps, which was a stray voltage clearinghouse. And I did my own public service. And over time, I was interviewed by all the major news outlets in New York, and Channel 11 did a story about it. Con Edison invited me to the Jody Lane conference, and I was the first non-electrical, or rather community representative they had ever ushered into this back in 2008, because I was the only one who had that kind of experience or interest. But because I was doing outreach, which I was skilled to do, my work ended up in the New York Historical Society, the New York Press, and Con Edison began to offer public service in their bill inserts because they recognized that I had, no pun intended, tapped into an area that women and children really didn't have electrical indoor or outdoor awareness, and that it was in their best interest to highlight ways in which they could self-protect and their pets to reduce the risk of injuries or, God forbid, fatalities. So that
Mhm.
was very, I couldn't monetize it, but that was very rewarding to me that I got as far as I got
Right.
voluntarily and basically as one person, like juggernaut, doing that. That helped my confidence. Um, I just decided over the pandemic to write this book because I knew the importance of it, that this condition accounts for very high levels of homelessness. In New York City, a drop-in center reported that 65% of their guests were schizoid. And I would be willing to wager that's underreported. That's just those who appeared. And those folks would not appear except out of desperation.
Mm.
I think they would choose a subway greeting rather than go to that kind of, but my clinician had told me the same thing. Homelessness, of course, is a very complex issue, but I felt to the extent that it could reduce homelessness, reduce a child's dependency, a parent's benefactor status, so both the familial and social toll of this condition, and that it could be treated far earlier than it was for me. So there would be greater hope that a person could manage his or her life more effectively. And that doesn't mean super achievement, it means manage, that you're able to function in a job, that you're able, if you want to date, you'll be able to date, you'll be able to vacate your parents' home, you'll be able to make eye contact, you'll feel less stigmatized or marginalized in life. Because a clinician would say that there's greater potential for happiness and that man is meant to be social.
Mm.
I don't know that this population really is happy. I don't think living with a lot of anxiety or fear, however it manifests itself, is a happy state.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True. Very well said. And I would agree with you very much is that, yes, our society isn't quite the version of happy that we're all searching for, are they? Um, I'm curious. So this book then, so it was written with the intention of helping people who are dealing with schizoid personality disorder to open doors for them and to, have a little bit more belief in themselves moving forward and stay away from things like homelessness. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just that so little is known about schizoid personality disorder because the symptoms would preclude the afflicted's going for treatment. If you're
Mm,
blocked from intimacy, then by definition, you're not going to seek counseling. There were times my father goaded me to go and I didn't want to go. But I also recognized that I had such a severe dread of any authority and that
mm,
in my mind, a clinician was going to judge me or hurt
I
me.
see.
And I
Right.
think that's the leitmotif. I think for people with SPD see other people as manipulative, evil, malevolent forces, and they will avoid it until their circumstances are so terrible and they may have a comorbidity like depression or anxiety, but they're not going to go in there saying, I think I'm schizoid. Can you help me? It,
Right.
they probably, like me, don't even know what the term meant. And that's been the reaction is people said, what is that? It's
Mm,
not schizophrenia. It's not as severe. Or, that's definitely not a psychosis. It's not as debilitating as schizotypia, which couldn't lapse into schizophrenia. It's a maladaptation. And I don't know if you recall the Tree of Life shooting a few years back.
yes,
Park Dietz, the clinician, said that the shooter was not schizophrenic, he was schizoid. He was a
I
truck
see.
driver, Robert Bowers. And the neighbors and the sons would say that he kept to himself and this, that, and the other thing. He had a lot of the hallmarks of being a Zoid. I would have to say and pray that that's an outlier. I don't think that SBD is so much dangerous as it is a danger to the afflicted for the reasons I mentioned.
Right. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Wow. You really know your stuff. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, you basically just recited the DSM-5 to me. Very well done.
Oh, but there are things to consider too. Eleanor Greenberg wrote a wonderful book about adaptations, and she doesn't believe in the DSM. And if you really believe in the DSM, is it very likely that a schizoid would write a memoir in the first place and something intended as public service? I'm not
Right.
supposed to care. And yet
Right.
I just put myself on the line. And at this point, my concern really isn't that I might be pigeonholed as a schizoid. I've done greater good with it than not by bringing this up. It should be brought up because it's preventable.
Yes. Yes. And I think that in our quest to heal from our affliction of any kind, we often find a lot of peace in having an opportunity to heal others through our stories. It can be wildly healing for us. Similar to that walk that you spoke about with the AIDS walk. Creating connections and helping others can be wildly rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. There was one time I went in and it was the anniversary of my mother's death. And the organizer there noticed that I wasn't quite as effervescent as I usually was. And I told her what the day was. But they notice certain things and they respect and welcome. If people who are good volunteers are very valued,
Yeah.
regardless of whatever kind of hand you're dealt, you're a helping hand. And that
Hmm.
means more to them than anything else that you might be carrying in your psyche.
Right. Yeah. Well, as we begin to conclude here, I'm curious about, what you might offer someone who feels like they are pressed down by their diagnosis, their maladaptation, the sickness, the whatever it is that they went through. That because I see you as a very determined person, and like you said, a fighter. What might be something that you might offer that person as advice when they're kind of feeling like, this has pressed me down.
Well, I certainly battled those demons too. And there was one day I remember years ago where I was bedbound with depression, but try not to think about yourself quite so much. Try to think about somebody who really needs you and will look at you and value you in a way that you don't value yourself. Try to step outside yourself because that's the literal meaning of ecstasy, ecstasis, is being beyond one's own status. And that will help you a lot. Also, we don't know if we're going to get a short life or a long one. Don't you want your life to have some value? And it does not mean being CEO of a company or in Wikipedia or whatever. Don't you want to feel that you've contributed, that you've made a difference? There's a wonderful book, The Five People You Meet in Heaven, Mitch Albom, and even people who are not particularly accomplished interact with other people in ways that are really meaningful and about which they're not aware. So you might as well go out, step outside yourself, and find some kind of purpose, whether it's a meetup group or volunteering or helping someone who's older or housebound or needs a dog walk, some random act of kindness every day. And think of how much more kindly you will feel about yourself. We all need a little bit
Beautiful.
of a pat on the back. So give it to yourself, but give it to yourself not in a self-serving or solipsist by being of benefit to others, because in spite of all this, and I'm supposed to have excessive self-absorption, I was always a very altruistic person, I always considered the other person's need before my own, and that was very gratifying to me. And the more I did that, the less attuned to my problems, which were significant, they didn't weigh on me in the same way.
Wow. Wow. Extraordinary advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for
You,
coming and for sharing your light with
thank,
us.
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I send you regards from the Turkish sauna in here.
Fine.
But
Pretty
anyhow,
hot and humid in your house, I've been told.
yeah, but anyhow,
Yeah.
so thank you very much, Christine, for this opportunity. And I hope this is of a lot of help.
Oh, certainly. I will link your book as well, for anyone who, feels that they might be potentially going through a diagnosis similarly to this or know somebody who might benefit from this. I think that this would be a really powerful resource to add.
Thank you so much. Or anybody who's just feeling down, go out
Yeah.
and do it remotely
Okay.
if you have to do it, but do something.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much again, Blair.
Thank you. Have a good night.